727 airplane on a tour to try and sell it, visiting all the different airlines and letting the airline pilots fly the airplane and see how would it be adaptable to their routes. One of them was in Bolivia, La Paz. They were concerned about our airplanes being able to operate at such a high altitude because the air is so thin at 10,000 feet, it doesn't cool the brakes when they land and take off, land and use the brake system to take as they take off.
Mm-hmm.
And repeatedly, when that it doesn't give them a chance to cool off in between flights. So anyway, we were going to demonstrate how that could be done there, and we made repeated landings and takeoffs, one right after the other, to demonstrate how the airplane could accommodate those restrictions.
Were you inside the plane or outside the plane at that point?
What was that?
Were you inside the plane or were you outside the plane?
I was outside it. I was the only person from Boeing allowed to get off the airplane because we had no paperwork. So they let me get off so I could take some pictures of it. And I had permission to do that. So I have no visa, I have no appointments with anybody, no permits to be in the country.
Passport?
No passport or anything of that kind. So I'm kind of, I don't know what the word for it is, but anyway, they started to do their takeoffs and landings, and I got myself in position alongside the runway, and there was nothing there at all. My instructions were to get photographs of the airplane landing or taking off, and on the runway there, identify it somehow as being in a foreign country and in Bolivia. And there was not a thing there. It's just like a flat desert. No identification, trees or buildings or mountains or anything of the kind. So the only thing that was out there with me was a couple of native girls who were there watching the festivities and partaking of the local weed that they chew on that gives them a little bit of a comforting feeling, I guess. And so I had a man with me from the airline that was there. He had a little electric motor-driven rig cart to move us about. And so he arranged to have these two girls who were there. I have no language compatibility with the women, so he was able to ask them if they would help me make my picture. So they agreed, and we positioned them alongside the runway so I could get them in the foreground with their characteristic costumes that they wear, or to us it seems like a costume, but to them it's their native dress. And very typically obvious where you were when you see the derbies that the ladies wear and the long coats and the wrapped socks. So they agreed to do that, and the thing of it is, I couldn't tell them that I wanted them just to stand there and look at the airplane as it came past. So I positioned them the way I wanted them, and that's the way they stood. Not looking toward the airplane at all.
But looking ahead.
Just looking out straight ahead.
Yeah.
So I had no choice but to go with the flow. No way to communicate with them. And so I got the picture. The airplane image was a little smaller than I would have liked it, but I had to have a one-shot camera there, as you can only get you time it just the way you think it should be. And anyway, that's the picture I got, and they picked that one out of the bunch because they did several landings and takeoffs, 5 or 6, I guess, and to such a degree that the brakes were indeed getting hot on the airplane. And after so many landings and having to use the brakes on to keep from going off the end of the runway, they began to overheat, and pretty soon the needle on the temperature gauge on the cockpit kept going up and up, and finally it reached the breaking point, and the pilot had to say, "Byron, I'm sorry, we have to take off now. You need to get down here right now."
Did you have like a walkie-talkie or something, or?
Yeah, we have a radio.
Yeah.
And so we took off immediately to get down to the end, but the silly electric cart was just barely moved. It was apparently low on battery or something. So I got out and grabbed my gear and started to run. And I ran as far as I could, or fast as I could, to get to the airplane. And he couldn't wait any longer, and I was still not there. The airplane was surrounded by a lot of people. They can't control the airport and the runways there like they do here. So a lot of native people were around the airplane. They're very curious, of course. And so I'm fighting my way through the crowd as the airplane got hotter and hotter, and finally they had no choice but to take off, to risk of getting on fire. So the 727, as you know, has a rear stair that folds up like this, and I could see that it was going up, and I made one last physical effort to get on the airplane, and I couldn't make it in time, but I got my hand up on the stairway as it was going up, so the crewman who was operating it, looking down at the ramp as it came up, saw this white hand grabbing a hold of the bottom, and the native people there have a tone to their skin, and I was obviously not one of them, and so he said, "Oh my gosh, that must be by." He lowered it down, and just enough for me to crawl and leap up on the stairway, so they could get it closed. And they dragged in order to get me up there. I couldn't do it myself, so they had to grab a hold of my arm and pull me on board. And they had a portable oxygen set up there with a mask, which they put on my head and gave me oxygen right away, because when you're running at that altitude, I was soon out of air. So that was quite an experience. They finally got the ramp closed quickly then, and immediately took off and cooled the brakes so they didn't catch fire. And that was the last landing and takeoff we did there because it was getting too hot. But we proved that it could be done, and it was not a problem when you had only the one cycle routine to do. But we took the film that I took and went to this photo studio in downtown Lima, and they agreed to let me process the pictures. So I went in their lab and rearranged it as best I could to suit our standards, and processed by hand the sheet film, 4x5-inch sheet film, processed by hand in the solution. And it's hard to hold the temperature low enough. It was so warm there that they developed their film at a very high temperature. And I had to get some ice and try and bring it down. But lucky enough, they turned out okay as far as image quality was concerned. We picked one of the negatives there that you see the print of, and they made 100 or 50 or 200 of those 8x10 prints overnight, and we sent them out right away to the different news bureaus and airlines and organizations that would be interested in our trip. So that's what happened there.
Cool. Thanks, Grandpa.
Was that enough?
Yep.
Yeah.